Hey guys, this is Austin. This is the $188 HP stream. So when I did a video on this recently, I was impressed with just how much laptop you're able to get for that kind of price. However, lots of you guys commented some other options for around $200 on the laptop side. One of the main things people suggested was to pick up a Chromebook, and you can see that there's a lot of appeal here. What you're getting is a very cheap computer that, while it's going to be lightweight, it's only running Chrome OS, so it's actually not really going to be a big problem. However, even more people suggested to pick up a used laptop, so that is where I found this HP Elitebook, which, even though it's a couple years old, still comes in around $200. Ever since Chromebooks were first announced, they've actually kind of been pretty much the same thing. So what you're getting here is a very basic laptop. However, when you're just needing to run a web browser, that kind of actually works out okay. And especially considering just how cheap it is, and especially how easy it is to set up. Stuff like schools and different places that are kind of constantly going through hardware actually really do get a big advantage out of using a Chromebook. So this is a fairly small laptop with an 11.6-inch display. So I will say it actually does feel reasonably well built, even though it is all going to be plastic. And if we open it up, we'll see lots and lots more plastic inside. The design is about as safe as it gets. So to be fair, Chromebooks actually do have a lot of the basics figured out. So the keyboards are pretty much always fine, the trackpads are pretty decent, the screens are going to be kind of mediocre, but you're going to be getting decent Wi-Fi as well as just enough ports for, well, whatever you're gonna do on a Chromebook. What you're getting here is a stripped down operating system that is entirely built around Chrome. Now for a lot of people, you actually can do most things inside the browser. However, there are also some other options that happen to run full Windows. When you get into the world of used laptops, there are options absolutely everywhere. Now to try to keep things at least somewhat even, I went on Amazon and tried to find something that was going to be refurbished. At least you get some kind of warranty, and you know it's not going to be completely beat up or whatever. At least, I hope it won't be super beat up and terrible in the box. Oh, well, okay, that's quite the unboxing experience. We get the giant old school power cable, as well as the laptop and this giant cardboard thing. Whoa, that's actually really heavy. As you can see, things have definitely evolved in the last few years, and your $200 laptop is much thinner and lighter than it used to be. There are advantages to using something a little bit older though, including a ton of ports. So in addition to a full DVD drive, we also have an SD card reader, a pair of USB 3.0 ports, we get FireWire. Around back, you're going to be getting VGA, a modem, Ethernet, and if you flip it over to the other side, we're getting a full-size display port, another USB port, as well as eSATA, and your headphone and microphone jacks. So you know, don't complain about your single port MacBook anymore. This guy for $200 has you covered. You also have the magical experience of being able to remove your battery. So inevitably, your old laptop has a terrible 35-minute battery life. It's easy to just grab another one off eBay and throw it in. There are definitely advantages in going with a little bit of an older design. But what I'm curious about is, what are the trade-offs? Is this really going to be your best option for $200? When it comes to the Chromebook 3, use it for about 30 seconds and you will immediately appreciate just how small and lightweight it is. At just over a kilogram or about 2.5 pounds, it's so lightweight it kind of feels like a toy. However, with the exception of the bezels, which are shiny and look a little bit cheap, it actually is reasonably well built. Take a look at the screen and you'll see it's rocking an 11.6-inch 1366 by 768 panel. Now while it's not incredibly sharp, it's going to be totally usable for something, especially at this price point. I'm kind of impressed with how bright the screen gets. A lot of the time when it comes to a budget laptop, the screens are a little bit on the dim side, but it's actually pretty impressive here. Although what's not impressive are the viewing angles, but I mean, for less than $190, what do you expect? The biggest consideration when you're picking up a Chromebook though is whether or not you're ready for Chrome OS. Now for a lot of people, it's going to be more than enough and completely fine. But for a lot of other people, they're gonna want the flexibility of something like Windows. It really just does depend on what you're using it for. The basic idea is that Chrome OS is a stripped down version of Linux that is focused around the Chrome browser. Now while that might sound crazy, especially if you live your life in a lot of web apps such as Google Docs and Office 365, it is usable. Some newer Chromebooks though, including the Chromebook 3, do support Android apps. And while it's an option, it's not exactly a great one on this system. For starters, most apps expect a touchscreen, which is fine when you're using an Android phone, but not so great when you're using an 11-inch laptop. So when it comes to actually clicking to say jump in Super Mario Run, it's not the greatest experience. And on top of that, a lot of other games just won't run all that well, even completely ignoring the controls. And performance really is an area where you notice the low price of the Chromebook. It's powered by a Celeron N3050 processor, which is about as low end as it gets in a laptop in 2018. To be fair, for basic web browsing, which is what most people are going to be doing with the Chromebook anyway, it's totally fine. Maybe not the fastest thing in the world. However, once you start loading up a few tabs, it does noticeably slow down. And keep in mind that I'm using the upgraded model with 4 gigs of RAM. There is another model of the Chromebook 3 which only has 2 gigabytes of RAM, if you know, you're really all about that single tab life. As a Chromebook, you don't exactly need a lot of storage, which is good, because the Chromebook 3 only has 16 gigs of storage on board. Now, while that might not be enough to get you a full copy of Windows 10 on board, it's actually fine for Chrome OS. It gives you about 9 gigs or so free to install other Android apps or whatever kind of stuff you want to actually download. One thing that is decent is the battery life. So Samsung claims up to 11 hours on a charge, and while that might be a little bit ambitious, this is a laptop that I would feel totally comfortable going for a full day without taking the charger. I know I sound pretty negative, but don't get me wrong, there is definitely a market for Chromebooks. However, if it's my money, I'm gonna spend my $200 elsewhere. Like for example, with this giant used HP Elitebook. Look, this thing is absolutely enormous. Now sure, you're getting a lot of extra ports and features that you're not getting on the other laptops, but you're also getting something that weighs over 5 pounds. It's like basically both of those combined. There are also some really weird quirks with the Elitebook. So beside the webcam, there's a little light button. Press it and a tiny LED pops out to illuminate the keyboard. So you know, if you're heavily working in the dark or you're needing to sign some incredibly important legal documents on your keyboard, this tiny light has got you covered. A quirk that I'm not as big a fan of is the trackpad. Now sure, you're going to have left and right click buttons on top and bottom, but even for 2012, this one's a little bit rough. Now it does support 2-finger gestures, but my big problem is just the tracking. Sure, once you crank up the sensitivity, it's not that bad, but especially compared to even low-end stuff like on the Stream and the Chromebook, it's just not in the same league. On the plus side though, in the middle of the keyboard is a little trackpad nipple. So you know, who's ever gonna complain about having an extra nipple in their life? Performance-wise, you're getting a Core i5-3360M. Now as a 3rd gen Ivy Bridge part, it is definitely a little bit on the older side, but it actually holds up surprisingly well today. Run it through Geekbench and there's no contest. It absolutely destroys both the Chromebook and the Stream. And it's not just for benchmarks either. You really do notice the difference when you use all 3 of these laptops back to back. The Elitebook just feels much faster. Now to be fair, I'm not going to want to do a lot of gaming on this, for example, but for normal use, it stays very snappy pretty much throughout, which is definitely not something I can say about the Stream, especially when it starts doing something like an update in the background and everything grinds to a halt. That Core i5 is backed up by 8 gigabytes of RAM and a 320 gigabyte hard drive. While 4 gigs of RAM is fine on the Chromebook and decent on the Stream, it is really nice to have that extra memory when you load more than, say, 2 things up at a time. And something I'm really surprised to say is the 320 gigabyte hard drive actually isn't terrible. Screen-wise, we're looking at a 14-inch panel with a resolution of 1366 by 768. Now that's actually pretty mediocre these days, to be totally honest, but when you compare it to these other 2 laptops, at the very least you're getting a nicer looking panel. It's low res, but it's not gonna, you know, make your eyes bleed or something. Something else that's slightly behind the times is the 802.11n Wi-Fi. Now keep in mind that this is actually a pretty solid implementation with 2x2 Wi-Fi antennas, and I was actually able to get around 200 megabytes per second on the download, but it doesn't quite match up to the latest AC solutions. Still though, for under 200 bucks, I'm not complaining. And speaking of price, this laptop was originally over $1,000 5 years ago. Considering that it's now about 20% of that value, it's actually not too bad, and you do see a lot of the advantages of having something that was much more expensive when it first came out. However, everything comes crashing down when it comes to the battery life. So as you would expect from a 5-year-old business laptop, it's not exactly the strong suit. I'm getting somewhere between 2 to 3 hours of fairly basic use on this guy. A big part of that is because it has a pretty small 55 watt-hour battery, so even though it is swappable, in theory you could carry a couple around, I feel like especially when you put this side by side with the newer laptops like the Chromebook and the Stream, which are getting well over double the battery life, it really is kind of hard to justify carrying this huge brick of a laptop around. And of course, the other big wild card is the fact that you're buying a used laptop. So like I said earlier, I picked up a refurbished model from Amazon, which does come with a warranty, and at least someone in theory went over it to make sure everything works. And thankfully, I lucked out. Everything actually does work pretty much flawlessly. Now there are a couple of very minor blemishes on the outside of the laptop, but honestly, I'm surprised with just how clean this thing is. But of course, your mileage will definitely vary depending on where you find the laptop, whether it's been refurbished or not, whether someone took care of it or not. For me, it really comes down to 2 things. You can either go with the safe option and get a brand new laptop with good battery life, it's going to be small and portable, but you're going to be losing performance, or do you want to take a chance on an older laptop that might have a couple of problems, but is going to deliver a lot more performance and a lot more features? If it's my money, if you find the right used laptop, I think it's totally worth considering. Even something that's 5 years old is still going to be good enough for 99% of people, and the good thing is, a lot of the upgrades that you might want to do in like more memory or an SSD are fairly cheap these days. I'm curious, what do you guys think is the best option for a $200 laptop today? Let me know in the comments below and I will catch you on the next one.